Welcome and thank you so much for joining. I'm Lorna Hegarty. I'm Director of Content and Comms at Squiz, and I'm really lucky enough today to be hosting the session. Now, this session follows some recent events that I know a lot of you attended and will have heard Assaph sharing his expertise and insights into the impact of AI on our digital experiences and how we're all best to actually prepare for those AI implementations. The focus for today is to get really practical, look at how best to introduce AI within your organizations. And it's based on what we're hearing and seeing at Squiz through the work that we do with both public and private sector organizations around the world, and what our guest Neil Jarvis is witnessing through both his consultancy work and his lived experience. So for those of you who haven't heard Assaph speak previously, he's our resident AI expert at Squiz. He's the senior product manager for AI, and he and his team are really focused on how we can best utilize AI within the Squiz DXT to create the best outcomes for our customers. As I mentioned, our guest today is Neil Jarvis, and Assaph and Neil will be having a great discussion all around this topic. Now, Neil is no stranger to Squiz either. We've worked with him and alongside him for many years now, and I've been lucky enough to host many a webinar with Neil as well, and I know that he's got some wonderful wisdom to share. Today, Neil is a freelance digital accessibility consultant. He's based in Wellington, and he specializes in strategy, policy, and best practice, working with government, not-for-profit, and large corporate clients. He uses assistive technology and AI services both in his professional and his personal life. All right, without further ado, I will hand over to you, Assaph.
Thank you, Lorna, for that wonderful intro. Thanks, Neil, for coming, and thank you all for coming and joining us. We at Squiz think that accessibility is a major thing that we all need to address. So without further ado, I would like to start the discussion. I would like to ask Neil, why don't you start telling us about your lived experience and how AI has changed your experience?
Thanks, Assaph, and many thanks to you and Lorna and everyone else in Squiz for inviting me here today to chat about this. It is a topic which I'm really excited about, enthusiastic about, as well as slightly nervous about. So we'll see how we go. As background, some of the people today may know me, may not know me. Most people won't. As Lorna says, I work in the field. I work in accessibility, specifically around policy and strategy work and that kind of thing. But I've been working in this field for a long time, and I'm a totally blind person. I use assistive technology every day and have done for many decades, far too many than I want to count. And I also inevitably, therefore, collided with AI technologies along the way. And I did that as part of my work, but I also did that as part of my sort of personal experience of just trying to access information. When you strip everything else away, really what I'm interested in is what is the best, most efficient way for me to access as much information as I can without having to jump through too many hoops. Assistive technology does that for me. I use a screen reader, and so does AI, given certain safeguards and precautions, which we'll get onto, I'm sure.
Can you tell us some of the best and worst moments that you had in the last couple of years interacting with AI?
There are many really great moments, and there are many moments that literally at the time felt like game changers. And I use that phrase really carefully because it's overused as a cliche and everyone rolls their eyes when they hear the phrase. But it is actually something which I can give you a couple of very specific examples, which kind of answer both sides of your question, maybe. In terms of the really good positive things, as with any decent technology, at the end of the day, what AI has done for me and for so many other people is made me more efficient at what I do when I do it. So I can think of a piece of work that used to take me best part of 3, 4, 4.5 hours to do. Now I could do successfully in half an hour or something like that. That's just labor saving. It's fantastic. And labor saving is what technology has been about for more than 100 years, right? So AI is not new to that, but it is an important part of why AI matters to me. But a really good example of where it works for me is I use AI a lot for determining visual information that I simply couldn't determine any other way. And a couple of examples of that would be photographs. Nowadays, everyone is taking photographs like there's no tomorrow. Get your phone out, snap, 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 and have 1,000 photos that you'll never look at again. I have lots of photographs on my phone. You might think that's odd because I'm totally blind, but bear with me. And I have lots of old photographs, family photos from when I was a child or other key moments in my life. For the younger ones among you, we didn't always take photographs all the time. Photographs were done for key moments in your life. So those were important things, family events, big milestones like graduation or something like that. So I have lots of photographs like that. I have never, obviously, ever seen them. But with AI, I once spent an entire night staying up, going through old photographs. And at the end of it, I didn't feel tired. I just felt energized because I was reliving those moments and I was there when they were taken. So I know how accurate or inaccurate those descriptions were. I can't explain to you the value of that to someone who wants to be able to look back on those events in ways that most of you will always have done. And this became a really important thing. But there are more practical things as well, you might argue. Choosing clothing that matches, color contrasting, and all that sort of thing is really helpful. Planning something. If you're going on a route, on a journey, you want to walk from here to the other side of town. Yeah, you can do that with GPS-based systems, but they won't tell you things about the kind of landmarks you're likely to pass in quite the detail that a good AI system will. I should caution that AI will also lie about some of those things, so you need to be on your guard. But again, knowing things like, look out for the narrowing of the pavement here. I've had that from AI, and it has been accurate. So those are really good examples, I think, of where AI works. Similarly, I can give you examples of where it just has frustrated me. And this is why you need to have a strategy that says, okay, let's make sure that we actually verify the information that we're getting. In the early days of ChatGPT and what became Google Gemini and even Llama and one or two others like that, I spent a lot of time, I confess, trying to catch it out. And indeed, I did succeed on a few occasions, and I'm not proud of it. I just did it. I happen to be a mad football fan, soccer to most people over here. And I was quizzing it about certain games that I remember from many years ago. And there was one game in particular, which is very easy to look up on the internet. It's a very famous match. And I asked it what the score was and who scored. It simply misled me or tried to. It did tell me who won. That was good. But it did give me the wrong score and it completely lied to me about who actually scored in that game. This was a particularly very famous game. It would not be hard to verify that information. But if you didn't know any better, you might take that as the definitive truth. So that's an example of hallucination or lying, call it what you will. I've had other circumstances where I've taken photographs of a room that I know really well, asked AI to describe the layout of that room, and it's done a really good job, 95% accuracy, which is, I would argue, as good as what I would get from many sighted human beings. However, I once had a real big row with it on the location of one object in relation to another one, where it was absolutely claiming that it was to the right of one object when I happened to know it was to the left. And you know, AI normally says to you, gosh, yes, you're so right. I'm sorry. I got it wrong. This is what it's really. It decided on this occasion it was going to really stick to its story. And we had a good barney about that. It was good fun. But didn't matter because I know the room really well and it was just a test. But had I not, and had I been using that to inform me about my surroundings, that could have been slightly dangerous. So you just got to know what your strategies are going to be when you're using these tools.
Those things, like you said, can actually get quite serious mistakes. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're serious. In your connections with the accessibility community, how do people navigate that gap, that dichotomy between the promise of the technology to the actual real world experience?
I guess that comes down to familiarity and strategy, which is why I say you have to be careful if it's someone who is not familiar with the technology, not familiar with how to ask the right question or how to make the right prompt or how to verify information that the AI tool has given you. To me, there is no substitute for doing it properly and asking and confirming and verifying and challenging, all of those things, which is why there's always big conversation in the accessibility sector about how far you can trust AI with improving accessibility. And let's face it, that's what we're particularly concerned with today. And I think that the answer to that is you can use it as a tool, like you can use many other things as a tool. But if you use it as, well, the AI said this was accessible code, for example, so I'm happy, you're going to come a cropper very quickly because it will mislead you. It will claim that what it's done amounts to accessible code when in actual fact it wasn't, and it may have introduced inaccessible code, in fact, into the equation. So I think there's no substitute for knowing how to prompt, knowing how to verify, knowing how to challenge, confirm, all those sorts of things, which, let's face it, has always been the case with any tool.
Yeah, that's quite what we find as well. It's a powerful tool, but in the same way that just getting a angle grinder doesn't make you a builder,
Yes.
you need to know how to use it and what you're doing. And sometimes arguing with it, like you said, it's like arguing with a toddler. It's sometimes better to scrap it, start again. When we talk about accessibility and all those things, we talk quite often about website accessibility, adding alt text to images, etc. But I think accessibility actually goes wider than that. A lot of our customers come from government and they have a wide range of communities or the universities that are dealing with prospective students from all over the world. The digital divide that we see across the world, people who understand the technology and understand how to work with, people who don't, people that have good English, that's the base default language. How do you deal with it? How do you add that aspect to accessibility in general?
I think the issues of accessibility and the digital divide are joined at the hip, if you like. They are totally interconnected, because the reason why we have to talk so much about accessibility is because there is a digital divide, and that divide is represented in many ways by the people who have access to expensive equipment versus people who don't have access to that equipment because of income or because of education or whatever it might be. And it also is manifested in the experience of people who have a disability versus those who don't. People who have a disability tend to be on lower incomes. That's constantly revealed as the case. They tend to be people who have not had the same opportunities as non-disabled people when it comes to education and employment. And we don't have to look at the unemployment rate among disabled people to verify that, but also looking at the rate of education that people have access to. It just isn't the same. And there are lots of reasons for that, going from inaccessible course materials through to the inaccessibility of places of learning and that sort of thing. So a whole different topic we could get into there. But if you don't have those opportunities, you're going to be on the wrong side of the digital divide, especially as more and more essential life requirements are done online or in some ways electronically. You can phone up your electricity company to query a bill, but be willing to sit on that phone for 2 hours before anybody actually answers and takes you through a mind-numbingly bewildering series of questions to prove that you are who you say you are. Or you can do it online, and they're constantly telling you whilst you're waiting for those 2 hours, go online. You can talk to our chatbot, or you can do your business online. That is also true. And those of us who can do that always choose to do that because life is short. But if you don't have the confidence or the equipment or the ability to get online, how are you going to do that? How are you going to avoid that 2-hour telephone wait and then the difficult conversation about what your grandmother's maiden name was or whatever it happens to be? So I think that's an example of where disability and the digital divide do come in. I think when it comes to access to AI materials and AI tools, a lot of the things that give the most benefit from AI often, not always, but often are behind a subscription paywall. The most really exciting developments in products like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude of late have been the ability to actually have real-time conversations with the AI. So you can work on something together as if you were talking to a colleague, or you can try different scenarios for, does this go with that? Or does that go better? Or what about the one I was wearing earlier? How does that work? You can do that now with all of these products. But for the most part, not all, but for the most part, those things are behind a $40 a month subscription, which if you don't have access to $40 a month to spend on such things, again, you're losing out on the digital divide.
That is something that guides our principles as well. When we build tools and technology, we build with the view that some of it should help you to get over the basics of just making that information available. But also, as you build the more sophisticated interface, they should help the users who can without neglecting the users who find it hard, and use those same tools to make this information easier to consume for everybody, whatever the side of the digital divide they're on.
Totally agree with you. It's really about the old story of not leaving people behind, isn't it? Just because I can do this, it doesn't mean that everybody else can. And then there'll be other things that I can't do that I will get left behind on if those things aren't considered. So I fully agree with you.
When we touch on the subject of tools, I would like to hear your opinion about how that has shifted over the years and the place of automated tools and now AI-enabled automated to help with accessibility.
I think as so many of these conversations begin, there are good and bad sides of it, or positive and negative sides of it. Working in the field of accessibility, we all know that there are many ways that you can attempt to assess the accessibility of, say, a website or a mobile app or any kind of digital product. You can do a manual audit undertaken by technical human beings who really know their stuff. And that is the ideal, or that is one of the ideals, certainly, because they are going to pick up a lot of things and they're going to pick it up in context. And they'll apply the appropriate criteria when making that decision. And they'll do so in, as I say, in the right context. Another ideal, of course, is human user testing, if you like, usability testing. You can get all the technology, all the technical compliance correct, and that's fantastic, but you can still make a pretty uninviting experience for real human beings who are not technical people. I always urge people, use real testers, not people who are steeped in the technology, but people who just want to get the job done, to determine whether or not you are actually presenting an accessible experience for them. And in between all of those, there's the automated checkers, the automated tools that you're talking about that have existed for a long time and which are, I think, an important part of the toolkit, but they're not things that you should rely on totally. We always say that probably no more than 30 to 40% of issues are picked up by those tools. Well, what that means, if you flip that over, is that getting on for 70% of issues are not picked up. That's not a level of quality assurance that you would be happy with in any other aspect of your work. Similarly, they will often pick things, there'll be false negatives and false positives, which isn't helpful, but also they'll be fooled. And they'll be fooled not intentionally necessarily, but just by work in progress. So one of the classic tests that they might do is to test for alt text, as you mentioned earlier. If they find alt text, but that alt text just says, this is a piece of alt text, that's actually not very helpful, is it? It may have technically passed the check of was there alt text for this image, but it actually was wholly useless alt text in terms of it being an alternative way of understanding what the image was. It can't in any measure be said to have passed that test, but many tools will pass it. Now, they'll get cleverer and they'll recognize that sort of thing and they'll have exceptions and all that kind of thing. But many, and I have seen it, many tools will pass that test. And that is simply not a good idea. Just as we were saying earlier, in terms of AI, you have to use it appropriately. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw something into your wall. You might hammer a nail in, but you wouldn't hammer a screw in. Or if you did, you'd end up with a broken screw. It's using the right tool for the right occasion and using it in proportion. So by all means, let an automated tool help you do the heavy lifting. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just remember that's all it is doing, and it isn't going to be able to pick up on more than half of the things that you need to be picked up.
Yeah.
And I would say the same is true for AI. The numbers may be different. I haven't gone through any kind of effort to measure those, but the same would still be true.
Yeah, that is quite our experience as well. We're revamping our accessibility auditor and perhaps adding it so when it recognizes inappropriate alt text, it can help with that as well. We're also adding other tools that can help check the content and perhaps rewrite it, because we all know that we quite often have the pages that have been written by the engineer and approved by the lawyer, and nobody can understand them. Many organizations then fear, look, we've had all this investment into getting our website AI, but now we think, okay, if we introduce all these tools, would that make us slip back? How do we know we don't slip back? What are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good question. I think the fear of having something which is great and then running the risk of spoiling that greatness by maintaining it, if you like, ensuring that you've got new content and maybe even new features and new facilities. What will that do to the accessibility of the product? Will it send it back into over the edge into an inaccessible product? I think that's a real, genuine concern. You can't argue, well, stop, don't develop any further. That's not the solution. So the solution has to be do what you've always done. Build accessibility. If you haven't always done it, you should be doing it. Build accessibility into your end-to-end workflow from ideation through design, development, testing, prototyping, product release, and maintenance. Make sure that accessibility is part of that process in the same way that security should be and probably is. Make sure that accessibility is tested and planned for. Don't think, we'll just do all the work and then we'll have a quick trip back through the system just to check that it's still accessible. You will come to grief if you do that, as you would have done if you'd done that with the very first iteration of your product. Just make sure that accessibility is built into your workflow. Don't stop doing it just because you've got more tools. More tools don't release you from the obligation and the necessity to maintain good housekeeping, if you like.
And I think that goes back to one of the earlier points you mentioned. AI can help you stay productive, right? If we provide you the right tools, it can help you build accessibility and stay on top of it as you go a lot easier. I'd like to ask you something to go a little bit broader now. Look into the future. When you think about how technology has shifted dramatically several times over the past few decades, right? From the introduction of PCs and the internet to mobile devices and now AI. When you look into the future, when you think specifically around accessibility and all these new directions that are now possible, what do you see coming? What do you think are both the dangers and the things we should strive towards?
That's another great question, and one I'm really cautious about answering, just because I think anyone who makes predictions right now around the impact of AI is gambling with that, because this can be played back to me later, you know. But no, look, I think that there have been some, I call them punctuation moments when there was a comma or a semicolon in the development of accessibility and the development of, well, life, really. One of those was the advent of online information and online services in the 1990s in particular. And having lived through that process and having had a long life before where there was no such thing, I still marvel at how brilliant the internet is. I might roll my eyes at Facebook and Twitter and one or two other things, and social media generally. I'm afraid I can't get on board with that in the same way. I play with it, but it's not something I'm particularly joyous of. But there are so many other aspects of the internet or online information, electronic access, which absolutely have reshaped all of our lives for the better, no question. Certainly in my case, I wake up every day thinking, wow, isn't this marvelous? I think another punctuation point happened with the onset of large language model AI. And I think that was also something which we won't know just how impactful that is going to turn out to be until we're able to look back on it over 20 years or more. But we do know it's going to be significant because we can already see it. We can already tell the ways that people are working differently and getting information differently compared to what they were doing even 3 years ago, just 3 years before this technology became well known to the masses. I know that it was being discussed and was well known to people like us who are tech geeks, but for ordinary people who just go about their lives, technology is just the means by which they do things rather than the reason why they do things. Then I think the changes that they have undergone in the past 3 years are massive. And I think in some ways even bigger than those that we experienced in the early to mid 90s. However, that comes with all sorts of pros and cons. And the pros are all the things that I've talked about earlier. For me, everyone will have their own stories about how AI has been such a boon for them. But they'll also have their own stories about how it has been quite dangerous for them. And I just gave a few flippant examples earlier. We do know that AI is being used in harmful ways, and you can't get round that. You can't get round the biases that AI has learned about and projects in a magnified way. And you have to address that, I think, as responsible organizations who are using this tool, just like you would have to address the risks that the ability to do whole-scale copying gave us when copy and paste came along in word processors. So it's just another example, albeit a far bigger one, perhaps. Where it will go in the future, I don't know. I think one of the things people are talking about is, will AI be able to deliver full accessibility for us in the future? There are certainly people in the accessibility community, not many, but one or two who have made their name over many decades, who have been saying things like, we'll never get accessibility fully because there are just too many websites, too many applications, too many products to get through. We're playing whack-a-mole all the time. So let's just give it up to AI and let it sort it out. That's a very crude representation of what a couple of people in the sector have said. They were shouted down, and I think quite rightly, by the vast majority, because we know that accessibility happens when people actually take responsibility for the products that they produce. So yeah, you're certainly going to be able to have AI help you with that move to a more accessible product and to maintain that. No question that can help you, but it will not in itself deliver that product to you. And I think if anyone relies on that to happen, you're going to risk the kind of things that you were talking about earlier of slippage and falling back, because even the AI that has not yet been thought of will still make serious errors when it comes to what amounts to accessible code and accessible design, because it will be learning from other people what it thinks that is.
Quite right. Having lived through and gone through several hype cycles before, we humans generally overestimate the short-term effects, but underestimate the long-term effects.
Absolutely, yes.
Just thinking that this new wonderful tool will solve all the problems never work. I think change is coming, that much we know, but we as humans need to be staying responsible for humans.
Yes.
This is one of the guiding principles that guide Squiz in developing all the products that we do. We try to make people's lives offline better by providing them richer online experience, by making those more accessible. But the features that we provide are built and guided in a way that helps. If we know change is coming, if we know this is a power tool that you can use for good and bad, how do you can use it safely? Like, how do you build up your capacity within the organization, whether it's around accessibility or other aspects, to be able to, like you said, not shoot yourself in the foot? At this point, I would love to invite questions if you have anything you would like us to talk about.
Had a question come through there, yes. So how would these Squiz-focused AI accessibility tools work? Would they come out as a report, or would the changes happen in an automated fashion? For our organization, all AI content and workflows have a human-based checkpoint for sense and checking. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, one of the dreams that our CPO has is that fix my website button, but we can't abdicate that responsibility of actually checking. So it will be a combination of things, but there will be scanning and reports saying, we think you have those problems, but then try to coalesce them. You're saying, okay, these similar problems come from this root cause. Or we've identified broken links, but we've deduced that this is probably the asset it's referring to. Or we've identified missing alt text, but also probably inappropriate alt text for those images, we can actually suggest and fix them up for you. So it will be a scale, a maturity scale as the technology evolves, and we will release it when we feel it's safe and mature enough. So we will provide you the reports, we will provide you the tools that says, yes, just go in for that. And we will always strive to keep the human in the loop. So that is, if you have 10,000 assets that don't have alt text, going one by one and improving them is probably bad. But suggesting them and surfacing them and allowing you to inspect and see what's going on, that's the path that we're taking. We're trying to make you more productive.
Awesome. I've also just had another question come in here. I'm very interested in hearing more about the AI tools that you have used, Neil, in relation to AI tools being able to read pictures. And are there any tools like these available for free use?
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, there are quite a few, in fact. Many of the tools that I have used have been mobile phone based. And I believe that there are versions in iOS and Android. So depending which system you have, you should be fine. There's an app called Be My Eyes, which was originally designed as a means that people could connect to a volunteer through video that would allow that volunteer to assist somebody in a simple task. It might be, can you tell me what color this jumper is? Or can you tell me what's in this packet? Or I've just dropped something on the floor. Can you help me find it? That sort of thing. That was where it first came from. But the makers made a decision to introduce an AI feature alongside it. It hasn't replaced the volunteers, it's just used alongside in parallel, although I think it's probably used more than the volunteer now. You can literally take a photograph of anything, be it your surroundings, be it an object, be it yourself. Once you've done that, it will send that picture to its server. So remember, it is going up to the cloud, and most of these things do that. And then it will report back to you what's in the picture, and it will give a good description, maybe 100 words or so, to give you an idea of the picture is. That's great for maybe 80% of the things that you want to know about. That's all you need to know. But you might actually want to be able to interrogate the app to find out more information than it told you. And in which case you can say to it, tell me more about such and such. And you can ask questions. So the classic would be, does this jumper go with the shirt I showed you earlier, whatever it might happen to be? You can then literally dig deeper into the information that it has captured through that photograph. Be My AI is the name of that. There are also many others. There's a great one called PickyBot, which is wonderful for describing videos and also photographs. So you might take a video or someone sends you a video. How many times do people send you videos on social media or through your WhatsApp? You can now get that app to interrogate the video and give you a detailed report of what it's seen and what's taking place. So not just still pictures, but even kind of video pictures too. So that's exciting. PiggyBot is that one, and it's in the App Store, as is Be My Eyes. Even if you just use the standard ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude from Anthropic, they all have this capability now. They're all there. Just go and play with them. And all of them have free tiers. Some of them have additional subscription tiers that you can do, but all the things that I've described so far, you could do on a free tier for all of them.
We have had another great question through. With the introduction of chat, fuzzy responses are going to be a challenge for all users. Neil, what techniques are you using to help detect iffy responses? And Assaph, what steps are you taking to minimize the presentation of errors in your new conversational search feature?
I think going back to what we were discussing earlier, the sort of challenge, verify, ask further. I'd be honest with you, if it's really important to me, I will ask the question on more than one platform. And I find that to be quite interesting. That's actually how I first discovered the football issue that I talked about earlier. I will absolutely ask it on more than one platform if I want to do that. But I will also make sure I've understood the response it has given me. And I will then go back and question it further. When you say, what do you mean by, or does this mean that, or that, those? So qualifying questions, I think, are really helpful. But again, as I said earlier on as well, I think getting your prompt right at the beginning is really important. That will save you a lot of hassle if you can be as specific. And most of the AI tools are really good. They want you to be specific because the more context you give it, usually the better the answer is. So prompt write, challenge, verify, and duplicate. Go and check somewhere else as well.
In response to the second part of the question of what steps we're taking with the conversation or search filter to ensure that the answer are correct and faithful, it comes at two distinct layers. So one is things that we can actually do in the code, where we can actually check parts of the answer and check that the answer comes through. But that relies on the bigger part, which is the whole process around building conversational search. So we start by defining, okay, if you want to be able to answer questions, what are the sources of truth for that information? So we define that and we feed that to the LLM. You need to answer this question based on this information. That usually helps it pull the right information, not just try to figure out, oh, this is one university, but I read this information from another university. It's probably right. No, you have to use this information. So we feed this context in, the LLM then construct the answer. But then, like I said, we go in code and verify that the answer is indeed actually came from that information. We break it down and do it. If one of them goes off script, you have another one that goes and check it. But it also, like I said, if we start with the content, what's a high value but low risk context where you have a lot of static information that can do it? Do that first, build up that capacity, build up that confidence that the whole process works end to end. That if you ask a question on that content, the chatbot will not answer questions on different content. It will stick to script. It will only provide answers that are faithful to the original content, that are still useful. Once you come confident with that, then you can expand the content to other areas or even talk about more advanced use case, like integrating or personalizing those responses and whatnot. It is a combination of a philosophy of how you should approach it with guided steps on building, as well as things that we do very hard in the code itself to make sure that the answers are correct and come only from that source question.
I actually forgot to say this earlier on, just before you spoke, but I think it's important as part of that verification process. I want to see links to the sources. So if I'm being told very confidently by a ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is that such and such is the case and this is the fact and et cetera, I want to be able to verify that myself outside the AI. And so I will request it to provide me with the sources that it got that from. Give me links to those sources so I can go and verify them for myself too.
Yeah, quite right. It is something that I use as well. Always read through the sources. Sometimes it's really good, and sometimes no. It went completely, of course. And this is something that we try to build in our tooling as well. So provide that reference information of this answer came from those pages as well.
Have either of you started using agentic AI tools, goal-driven specifically, and do you have anything to share about this topic?
This is something that we're playing with. Philosophically, LLMs under the current architecture do not have the world knowledge under them. So we can joke about it. We can say, oh, let's think about it as an intern with book knowledge, but they go and smoke weed, so they hallucinate. It's not a real person. It's a probabilistic model about what comes next. Okay. So it is absolutely wonderful feeling of magic when you ask it, can you do something? And it goes through the steps of doing it the first time you see it. So the promise of agentic tools is really exciting. But then there's the capability gap. Just because it can do something doesn't mean it can do it well enough, reliably enough the whole time. There is a balance of actually trusting it, verifying it, and building that architecture around it in the code that says, if you need to do a process, okay, here's an agent that can do some planning, that can break this task into things. Are those steps correct? Yes. Okay. Here's the agent for the next step. Do that, verify it. Is the agent for the next step? Do that and verify. So it's breaking out into agents. It's not an expert that can do end-to-end task, but rather here are agents that are specialized for particular task. And there is something else that can track the overall execution and also keep the human in the loop. Even the agents themselves can interact with the human, but it is keeping the human in the loop throughout that process where a person can press the big red button and say, stop, not right, but go and do that.
I certainly would endorse what Assaph says. I've been playing about for example, with trying to build a model involving decision trees and things like that. And it's great one step at a time. I think it gets bored and it wanders off if you say to give me something from end to end. But in actual fact, that's not how you would work with a real person anyway. I find it if you do it one step at a time, you're more likely to have something useful come out of the experience than if you try and swallow it whole, as it were. So I totally agree with that. And it has at least given me things to think about that maybe I might not have thought about if I hadn't had that conversation with the bot. I totally agree. I think when you first see it, there's the wow factor and you think, gosh, that's amazing. But you start to see how shallow it can be after a while. And that's the thing to watch out for. I think, as Assaph says, it's a giant prediction tool, right? It's taken the dictate features that we've all known and hated for the past 20 years and put them on super steroids and come out with what it has. It's great. Again, know how to use the tool.
In practical terms, though, you can think about it as interns, where you delegate specific tasks and you try to use them to break down those things, but you have to have in control and use it. Don't expect the LLM to do everything outside. Because it's a prediction tool, a small error early on can lead it to veer off course, and it has no mechanisms to self-correct. So you need to be in charge of that. You need to be about the self-correction. Some of it can be automated and mechanized by using other models to check the output and try to correct the process. But having a human in the loop as much as possible is really the way to go. Whether it's plain LLM or whether it's agentic interactions.
It's actually a really interesting question. It's something that comes up a lot in the conversations we have with customers. Assaph, I'm sure you hear a lot. How do people know that their organization's actually ready to get started on implementing AI? How do they understand if it's mature enough to be starting on this journey? Is that something that either of you would have any answers to?
You need to get started, but don't expect it to be a magic bullet. Where you are depends on your circumstances, but you need to have an understanding of AI. So sometimes we think two tasks are equivalent because they look to us that for a person will be equivalent, but the AI will absolutely struggle with one of them, but do pretty well on the other. So you need to find out those jagged edges of capability of where it is. And it takes experimentation to something that's specific to your organization. The second thing is those tools are general purpose, essentially. So the way to fit them to your organization is to bring in your organizational knowledge. So when I was talking about conversation as such, it's grounding it in your website information or your particular knowledge base. How can you mix in your information, give it to the tools in a way that it can consume it, right? Raise your hand if you think you have a website with perfect content. And take it apart later. We all know that we have content issues. So you need to start thinking about, okay, if I need to mix in my content, is my content good enough? To what extent is it good enough? What are the gaps? How do I need to improve it? And then how do I need to massage it and prepare it for the AI to consume and use effectively? The best way that I think about it is dream big. Dream about what the tool could be, because it is an inflection point. It will change things, but start small. Have an understanding of this is something that we could do today. How do we do it? How do we play with the tools to build up the organizational muscle, understanding, use the tools, build it, feed it more and more data as we become more and more comfortable through that to build up the capability of what we can do with it.
I, again, completely agree with you. I think it's not a question to me whether people are ready for it. It's coming anyway, right? You don't actually have a choice about that. It's on its way. It's a question of how you embrace it and how you deal with it. Just like it was 30 years ago when do you need to be online, or all that sort of conversation was going on at the time. I do a lot of work around organizational maturity, particularly around digital accessibility. And one of the things we always say to people is just what you said there, Assaph, which is you've got to start. And starting doesn't mean to say you've got to get to be the most mature organization in the world by the end of next Wednesday. It means that you actually have to have a plan and start to move forward, if you like, take baby steps, but start making things going in the right direction. And then when you've done that, you can then start taking bigger bites and moving forward to the next bigger challenge that makes you even more mature and even more confident. That's that awful word, but it's one that's appropriate here. It's a journey. It's something that takes time, and it takes planning, and it takes recognizing that, again, it should be part of your daily workflow, not something you bolt on and give it to the AI or the accessibility person in the corner.
I think we've probably got time just to cram in that one last question from Alan. Alan says, seems like there's a lot of user education needed in order to get good results from these tools, certainly for implementers and even more so for users. Assaph, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, if I gave you a pencil, you'd probably be able to scribble, but would you be able to write pens like Da Vinci? If I gave you a angle grinder, will you be able to erect a shed on your backyard? Having the tool doesn't obviate the need to actually understand what you're doing with them, and having a domain expertise and trying to, what's the appropriate use for this tool, right? It could be as simple as a hammer and a screwdriver, but this is a power tool. So it's very powerful, and to get the most benefit out of it, you absolutely have to immerse yourself and get an understanding. You don't necessarily have to go into the full details, right? You don't have to understand the full math that goes into building the tool in the same way that you don't necessarily have to understand how an angle grinder is built with the motor inside it, right? But understanding what the tool is good for, what the capability is, how to get the most value out of it is a uniquely human trait, and why we still need to be in command of it.